The soft chime of the jewelry store doorbell echoed through the quiet, elegant boutique. The warm golden lights reflected off glass display cases, making the diamonds and gemstones sparkle like tiny stars. The store was nearly empty, except for a sharply dressed man standing near the counter, his gaze fixed on a single diamond ring resting in his palm. He turned it slowly under the bright showroom lights, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, something distant, almost haunted. Sebastian King wasn't the kind of man who wandered into jewelry stores without a purpose. A billionaire known for his luxury hotels and real estate empire, he rarely had time for sentimental distractions. But today was different. This ring, it wasn't just any ring. It was an exact replica of one he had lost years ago, a piece of his past that had vanished along with someone he once loved. His fingers tightened around the band, memories rushing in, memories he had spent years trying to forget. Just as he was about to place the ring back on the counter, a small voice broke the silence. "Hi, sir." The voice was soft, polite, full of curiosity. Sebastian turned slightly, his sharp blue eyes landing on a little girl standing beside him. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her brown curls bouncing as she shifted on her feet. Clutching a small, well-loved teddy bear in one arm, she peered up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "My mother has a ring just like yours," she said brightly. Sebastian's entire body stiffened. His grip on the ring tightened. For a moment, he wasn't sure he had heard her correctly. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice steady, but laced with something unreadable. The little girl beamed. "My mom has a ring just like that one," she repeated, pointing to the diamond in his hand. "She always wears it. She says it's very special." Sebastian's heart pounded. That wasn't possible. The original ring had been unique, one of a kind. The only person who had ever owned it was... No. He shook off the thought. Impossible. He had accepted the loss years ago, forced himself to bury the memories, along with the pain. But something about the certainty in this little girl's voice sent a shiver down his spine. He studied her closely now. There was something oddly familiar about her, though he couldn't quite place it. "What's your name?" he asked carefully. "Mia," she chirped, swinging her teddy bear back and forth. "I came here with my mom. She's over there." She turned and pointed toward the back of the store. Sebastian followed her gaze, and the moment his eyes landed on the woman standing near the necklace display, the world seemed to slow. His breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. The woman turned slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and in that instant, time collapsed. Sebastian felt as though he was staring at a ghost. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs, the weight of recognition crashing over him like a tidal wave. Emily. The name thundered through his mind, and for a second, he forgot how to breathe. The woman he had once loved, the woman who had vanished without a trace, and she was wearing that ring. Sebastian took a slow, deliberate step forward, his pulse hammering in his ears. His mind was screaming with questions, but none of them could form into words. Was it really her? How was this possible? And if it was her, why had she never come back? Before he could move any closer, a small tug on his sleeve stopped him. "Sir," Mia whispered, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Are you okay? You look like you saw a ghost." Sebastian inhaled sharply, forcing himself to regain his composure. He had to be sure. He had to know the truth. "Mia," he said slowly, his voice quieter now. "What's your mother's name?" The little girl smiled brightly. "Emily." The name struck him like lightning. "Emily." Sebastian barely noticed when Mia let go of his sleeve and ran toward her mother. He was still frozen in place, his mind reeling with 1,000 questions. If Emily was here, if she was really alive, Then why had she never come back to him? Mia reached her mother's side, tugging on her hand. "Mommy, look! That man has a ring like yours," she chirped excitedly. Emily turned at the sound of her daughter's voice, a soft smile already forming on her lips. But the moment her gaze met Sebastian's, the smile vanished. Her face paled. For a long stretched moment, neither of them moved. The weight of unspoken words, of lost years, of unanswered questions, hung between them like an invisible storm. Emily's fingers instinctively curled around the ring on her hand, the very same ring that Sebastian had once placed on her finger so many years ago, promising her forever, a promise that had been shattered. Sebastian took a slow step forward. His eyes locked onto hers, searching, questioning. "Emily," he said, his voice low, as if testing to see if saying her name would make her disappear. Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to say something. Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to say something, anything, but her mind was spinning. She had spent so long preparing for the possibility of this moment, and yet, now that it was here, she had no idea what to do. Mia looked between them, her small face scrunching up in confusion. "Mommy, do you know him?" Sebastian let out a slow breath, his gaze flickering from Emily to Mia, and then he saw it. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, the undeniable resemblance. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as realization slammed into him like a tidal wave. Mia. She was 7 years. Emily had been gone for 7 years, and this little girl, her little girl, his daughter, Sebastian's, world tilted on its axis as he stared at Mia, who had just unknowingly turned his entire life upside down. Emily saw the change in his expression. She saw the way his eyes darkened, the way his jaw tightened. She knew what he was thinking. "Sebastian, please," she murmured, her voice almost pleading, but it was too late. He already knew the answer, and there was no turning back now. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy, pressing against Emily's chest, like a weight she couldn't escape. She could see it in Sebastian's eyes, the storm of emotions brewing, the unspoken questions threatening to spill out all at once. But before he could say anything, before the truth could shatter the fragile moment, Mia tugged at Emily's hand. "Mommy, do you know him?" Mia asked again, tilting her head. Emily swallowed hard. She forced a small smile, kneeling beside her daughter. "Sweetheart, why don't you go look at the bracelets over there? I'll be right here." Mia hesitated, looking between them, sensing something she didn't quite understand. But then she nodded, skipping off toward the other side of the store, her curls bouncing with each step. As soon as she was out of earshot, Emily turned back to Sebastian, her voice a whisper, urgent and strained. "Is Sebastian not here?" But he didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on hers. His hands clenched at his sides. His mind was racing, trying to process the truth. But his voice came out quiet, controlled. "She's mine, isn't she?" Emily inhaled sharply. She wanted to deny it, to find some way to keep him from the pain she knew was coming. But the truth was written all over her face, and Sebastian saw it. His chest tightened. A mix of anger, disbelief, and something deeper, something raw twisting inside him. 7 years. 7 years of wondering, of aching, of burying the past because he thought it was gone forever. And all this time, Emily had been out there, raising his child, his daughter. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the weight of his words hit like a hammer. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily lowered her gaze, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter as if it could steady her. "It's not that simple." Sebastian let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. Not that simple. His voice was quiet but laced with restrained fury. You disappeared, Emily. You left. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. And now, after all these years, I find out I have a daughter. That's not simple. That's... He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. God, do you even know what you took from me? Emily flinched. She had expected anger. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, knowing that if they ever crossed paths again, Sebastian would demand answers. And she had them, but saying them out loud, reliving the past, was harder than she had imagined. Tears stung at the edges of her eyes, but she blinked them away. I didn't have a choice, she whispered. Sebastian's jaw tightened. There's always a choice. Emily let out a breath, shaking her head. Not when I found out I was pregnant. Not when I realized what it meant. His eyes darkened, his brows furrowing. What are you talking about? She hesitated, glancing around the store as if searching for a way out. But there was none. She had spent years running, but she couldn't run anymore. Not now. Not from him. Sebastian, she started, her voice trembling. Do you remember your father's last warning before I left? His expression shifted slightly, confusion flickering across his face. Before realization dawned, his father. Richard King had never approved of Emily. He had always seen her as someone beneath their family status, an obstacle in the carefully curated life he had planned for his son. But Sebastian had fought for her, had refused to let his father dictate his choices. And yet, Emily had left, Sebastian's fists clenched as the memory surfaced. He threatened you. Emily nodded, her throat tightening. He told me if I didn't leave, he would destroy me. And if I ever tried to come back, if I ever told you the truth, he would take my child away. Sebastian's body went rigid, his pulse roaring in his ears. He had known his father was ruthless. But this was something else. And you believed him. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. You know what he was capable of. Sebastian exhaled sharply, his mind racing. His father had wielded power like a weapon, controlling everything and everyone in his path. If Emily had been pregnant, if she had stayed, would his father have really gone that far? A bitter taste filled his mouth. Yes, he would have. Sebastian's stomach twisted. He had spent years resenting Emily for leaving, hating the way she had vanished without a trace. But now he understood. And yet it didn't change the fact that he had missed everything. Her first steps, her first words, every single moment a father should have been there for. His daughter had grown up thinking he didn't exist. His voice was rough, unsteady. You should have told me. Emily let out a shaky breath. I wanted to. Every single day I wanted to. But by the time I thought it might be safe, I convinced myself it was too late. Sebastian ran a hand down his face, trying to ground himself. The weight of the years they had lost settled heavily on him. But there was no time to grieve what had already passed. His gaze flickered to Mia, who was still admiring the jewelry, completely unaware of the storm unraveling between her parents. He had a daughter, and now that he knew, he wasn't going to walk away. He turned back to Emily, his voice steady, firm. I want to know her. Emily's breath caught. She had feared this moment for so long, feared what would happen if Sebastian ever found out. But looking into his eyes now, she saw something she hadn't expected. Determination, yes, but also something else. Love. Not just for Mia, but for her too. She had spent years convincing herself that their love was in the past, that it had been buried under the weight of time and distance. But the way he was looking at her now made her question everything. Emily, Sebastian said again, softer this time. Let me be a part of her life. She hesitated, emotions warring inside her. But before she could answer, a voice interrupted them. Mummy, look! Mia came running back, holding a small bracelet in her hand. She stopped in front of Sebastian, beaming. Sir, do you like this one? Sebastian crouched down, meeting her eyes, his chest tightening at how much she reminded him of Emily. He forced a smile. It's beautiful. Mia grinned proudly. I think so too. Then she tilted her head. Are you my mummy's friend? Sebastian glanced up at Emily. Emily's throat tightened. This was it. The moment everything would change. Slowly, she reached for Mia's hand, her fingers tightening around her daughter's. And for the first time in 7 years, she whispered the words that would change all their lives. He's more than that, sweetheart. Sebastian inhaled, sharply, his heart pounding. And in that moment, he knew this was just the beginning. Sebastian's breath caught in his throat as Emily's words hung in the air. His gaze flickered between her and Mia, his heart hammering in his chest. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about his wealth, his responsibilities, or the carefully structured world he had built around himself. None of it mattered. All that mattered was the little girl standing in front of him, looking up with wide, curious eyes. Mia tilted her head, waiting for an answer. More than a friend, she repeated, her tiny fingers playing with the bracelet. In her hands, Emily exhaled, kneeling down beside her daughter. She gently tucked a stray curl behind Mia's ear before speaking. Sweetheart, this is Sebastian. She paused, her throat tightening. It had been years of holding back the truth, of shielding Mia from a world she had been too afraid to face. But this moment, it was inevitable. Sebastian reached out slowly, his voice softer than it had ever been. I'm your dad. Mia blinked. For a second, she just stared at him, as if trying to process what he had just said. Then, she turned to Emily. My dad? Emily nodded, squeezing her daughter's hand. Yes, baby. Mia looked back at Sebastian, her little brows furrowing, in thought. Then, to both of their surprise, she smiled. A small, cautious smile, but a smile nonetheless. You have the same eyes as me, she said, tilting her head. And your hair looks like mine when Mommy straightens it. A quiet laugh escaped Sebastian, though his chest felt unbearably tight. I guess we do look alike, huh? Mia studied him for a moment longer, as if searching for something only she could see. Then, in the most unexpected way, she simply nodded. Okay. Sebastian blinked. Okay. Mia grinned. Okay. She reached for his hand, her tiny fingers wrapping around his. I always wanted a daddy. Something inside Sebastian broke and healed all at once. He had spent years thinking he had lost everything that mattered. And yet here she was, his daughter, holding his hand, accepting him with a kind of innocence he never could have prepared for. Emily watched them, emotions swirling inside her. She had spent so long fearing this moment, afraid of what it would mean. But as she saw the way Sebastian looked at Mia, with so much love, so much awe, she realized she had been wrong. She had been protecting Mia, yes, but she had also been protecting herself. She had been afraid that letting Sebastian back in would bring back all the pain, all the heartbreak. But looking at them now, she knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to walk away. Not this time. Sebastian cleared his throat, blinking rapidly. Mia, would it be okay if I got to know you better? If we spent some time together? Mia nodded eagerly. Can we go to the zoo? I love the zoo. Mommy says I always pick the longest tours. Sebastian chuckled, glancing at Emily. The longest tours, huh? Emily smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. She likes to take her time. Sebastian looked back at Mia. Then we'll go to the zoo, and we'll take the longest tour they have. Mia clapped her hands, bouncing excitedly. Yay! Sebastian exhaled, feeling lighter than he had in years. But then he turned to Emily, his expression growing serious. Emily, he said gently, can we talk? Not just about Mia, about us. Emily hesitated. This was the part she had been dreading. The part where they had to confront everything that had been left unsaid. But she owed it to him. She owed it to both of them. She nodded slowly. Yeah, we can talk. Mia tugged at Sebastian's sleeve. But after the zoo, right? Sebastian laughed, his heart swelling. After the zoo, Emily smiled softly. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. Maybe the past hadn't been fair to them. Maybe they had lost time they could never get back. But they had today. They had tomorrow. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.